You're telling me you want thousands of dollars because my mailbox is the wrong color? That's exactly what was running through my head when the HOA president, Kayla, stormed over demanding $3,500. My wife, Julie, didn't even flinch. She looked her dead in the eye and said one word: number. That simple refusal sent Kayla into a tailspin. She actually called the cops on us. I'll admit, I started to panic until the officer showed up, took one look at Julie, and went pale. "Hey judge, you live here?" The horror on Kayla's face was priceless, but trust me, what happened next, nobody could have predicted it. Let me set the scene. Our neighborhood is one of those immaculate, upper-class suburban developments where the lawns look hand-measured and the mailboxes probably cost more than a used car. Julie and I had just bought a $2.5 million home. Yeah, the perks of being a software architect in the right industry. It came with all the luxury touches you'd expect: manicured gardens, a 3-car garage, and, as we quickly discovered, an HOA president who believed she was running her own private kingdom. I'm Blake Ward, by the way. Since I work from home, I get a front-row view of every bit of neighborhood drama. Normally that means arguments over trash bins being 2 inches too close to the street or never-ending debates about whether beige or cream is the correct fence color. But that morning was different. Kayla showed up at our place like she was leading a relay, marching up the driveway in a stiff navy blazer, clutching a clipboard that looked like it could stop a bullet. She rang our doorbell twice with sharp, commanding precision. I was upstairs grabbing coffee when I heard Julie open the door. "Here's the thing about my wife. She's the calmest person you'll ever meet. I've seen her handle absolute chaos with zen-like composure." And sure enough, she stood there in the doorway, perfectly relaxed, listening to Kayla rattle off her speech. Kayla introduced herself like royalty. "I'm Kayla Sanders, president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association." Then she dropped the bomb by claiming our property violated 17 different community rules and we owed $3,500. She said it like it was an undeniable fact of life. I was standing behind Julie, thinking, "Lady, you picked the wrong family today." Julie smiled, patient as ever, and asked, could you point me to the municipal code that gives the HOA that kind of authority?" Kayla's eye twitched. She hadn't expected to be challenged. Definitely not like that. Kayla started reading off her so-called violations. $2,000 for unauthorized landscaping because apparently our roses were the wrong shade of pink. Another $1,000 for a mailbox that was black instead of bronze. And $500 in processing fees for daring to move into the neighborhood without her approval. As she ranted, our elderly neighbor Mrs. Collins peeked out her door. She whispered to Julie just loud enough for us to hear. She ruined the Morgans with the same nonsense. They lost half their home's value. Then she slipped back inside, leaving us with a clear warning. Kayla wasn't new to this game. At that point, I was ready to cut to the chase. Julie, just tell her you're a judge," I said quietly. "Because yes, my wife is a federal district judge. She spends her days taking down criminals and corrupt officials. This whole garbage?" It was nothing compared to what she usually handled. But Julie just gave me that look she uses when she's deep in a case. "I want to see how far she takes this," she murmured. So Julie asked Kayla another pointed question. Has this assessment been ratified by a majority vote, in accordance with the Davis-Sterling Act?" Even I knew Kayla had no idea what that meant. For the first time, her confidence cracked. She stammered something about proper procedures before snapping back into her fake authority. She warned us we had 48 hours to pay, or she'd take things to the next level of enforcement. She actually said it like she was threatening us with some secret weapon. Julie stayed polite, even thanking her for bringing the matter to our attention, while requesting the specific documents proving the HOA had that power. Kayla walked away with a smug smile, tossing over her shoulder, most people fight at first, but everyone pays eventually." The moment the door shut, Julie pulled out her phone and started photographing every document. That's when I knew she was building a case. What are you planning?" I asked. She looked up, eyes sharp, almost excited. Kayla thinks I'm just another suburban wife she can bully. What she doesn't realize is she's not just bending HOA rules, she's committing federal crimes. And she just handed me all the proof I need. Julie disappeared into her office and made a call. This is Judge Parker," she said. I need you to pull some files for me." Right then, I realized this was no longer a neighborhood squabble. It was the opening move in a battle Kayla didn't even know she'd started. And sure enough, 3 days later, Kayla returned, this time with backup. She had a sleek briefcase, a contractor who looked like he wanted to vanish, and an even bigger sense of authority. She announced our non-compliance had doubled the fine overnight from $3,500 to $8,000, extortion dressed up in paperwork, and she had no idea what was about to hit her. Kayla's invoice kept growing. Suddenly, we owed another $2,000 in so-called attorney consultation fees and $1,000 for a lien preparation. I stood in the doorway watching this circus, and I could practically see Julie's prosecutor instincts activating. You know that look a cat gets before it pounces on a mouse? That was my wife, calm, calculating, ready to strike. Julie examined the paperwork with surgical precision, the same focus she uses in court when dismantling criminals' defenses. "This is fascinating," she said, her tone razor sharp. I knew the voice. It's the one she uses right before she dismantles someone piece by piece. Then came her question: "Could you walk me through the exact provisions of the Davis-Sterling Act that authorize these penalties?" Most people would have panicked, begged for leniency, or tried to negotiate. Not Julie. She went right for the legal foundation Kayla was pretending existed. That's when our neighbor Tom Rodriguez showed up, and his timing was perfect. Tom lived 3 houses down, and like his younger brother, Officer Rodriguez, who we'd meet later, he had that honest, no-nonsense presence you couldn't fake. Tom had been serving on the HOA board and quietly documenting Kayla's shady practices, waiting for the right person to challenge her. "Kayla," he interrupted firmly, "I don't recall the board voting on these penalties. Actually, I don't remember us meeting at all this week." His arms were crossed, his voice steady. He wasn't just questioning her, he was exposing her. "And since when do we tack on late fees without formal notice?" he pressed. Kayla's face shifted instantly from smug confidence to raw panic. She wasn't dealing with just another homeowner anymore. She was cornered by an insider who could blow her whole operation apart. Julie seized the moment. "I'd like to formally request a board meeting to discuss my payment options," she said smoothly, sounding like any reasonable homeowner. But what she was really doing was forcing transparency, a public forum where Kayla's scam couldn't survive in the shadows. "The bylaws require 7 days notice for all residents, correct?" Julie added sweetly. Kayla looked like a deer caught in headlights. Scammers hate exposure, and Julie had just demanded it. Kayla stammered, clutching her briefcase like it held state secrets. "That a broken bar won't be necessary. These matters are usually handled privately between the association and the homeowner." Translation: "Please don't drag me into the light where everyone can see I'm lying." But Julie doubled down. "I insist. As a new resident, I'd like to fully understand community standards. I'm sure other neighbors would benefit as well." The trap was set. That Saturday, the meeting was held at the community center, and it was a masterclass in strategy. Julie arrived with a neatly organized folder filled with research, HOA bylaws, state regulations, federal statutes, even case law from similar disputes. Kayla showed up with nothing but her usual bluster and a stack of fabricated documents. Julie started with calm authority. "Before we discuss the assessment, I'd like to clarify a few procedural questions." And then she unleashed question after question. Had the fine structure been properly ratified under civil code? Were the amounts consistent with enforcement procedures in the CCRs? Did the HOA even have the legal authority to file liens without proper notice? Each question was a blow, exposing holes in Kayla's scheme. Tom backed her up, pointing out irregularities he'd seen firsthand. 2 other board members, clearly uncomfortable, began questioning fines they'd signed off on without understanding. By the end, the board voted to suspend all pending assessments until they could review their enforcement process. Julie had won round 1 without ever mentioning that she was a federal judge. She'd beaten Kayla at her own game using nothing but preparation, precision, and patience. Walking back to our car, I finally asked the question that had been eating at me. "Julie, why are you dragging this out? You could end it in 5 minutes by showing her who you are." She stopped and glanced back at the community center, where Kayla was in a heated whisper with her contractor sidekick. Julie's voice hardened. "This woman has been running the same scam for years. She preys on new families, especially the vulnerable. She's forced people out of their homes and stolen hundreds of thousands through intimidation and fake legal threats. If I scare her off now, she'll just move on to the next victim." That's when I understood. Julie wasn't just protecting us. She was building a federal case to shut Kayla down permanently. Every bogus fine, every inflated fee, every abuse of process, Julie was documenting all of it to turn civil fraud into federal charges. As we reached the car, my stomach sank. A man in jeans and a baseball cap leaned against Kayla's SUV, speaking quietly with her while scanning the parking lot like security detail. His stance, his watchful eyes, everything screamed muscle. Julie noticed too. Her expression shifted from professional pride to tactical analysis. "It's about to get more interesting," she muttered. And she was right. Monday morning, I overheard her on a serious call in her office. The voice on the other end was clear enough to catch pieces through the wall. "Ma'am, what you've uncovered goes beyond HOA fraud. We're looking at systematic targeting of vulnerable populations." Julie's knuckles whitened around the phone. When she hung up, she looked at me, a mix of excitement and concern in her eyes. "Blakey, a broken bar. The state investigators just confirmed it. Kayla's not just a petty scammer. She's part of a criminal network defrauding homeowners across 3 counties." The truth hit like a freight train. This wasn't just about roses or mailboxes anymore. It was organized crime. City officials faking violations, shady contractors inflating repairs, even corrupt cops leaning on victims to pay up. And now, thanks to Julie, the whole operation was about to unravel. By the time Kayla showed up again, the so-called fine had ballooned to an outrageous $20,000. She'd stacked on $5,000 for imaginary municipal code violations, another $4,000 in bogus expedited processing fees, and $3,000 in legal enforcement costs. In other words, extortion and official-looking paperwork. But the real danger wasn't the number on the pagina, it was who she brought with her. Detective Morrison. The second I saw him, my stomach dropped. This wasn't about an overzealous HOA president anymore. We were staring at organized crime with police protection. Morrison had the look of a man who'd sold his badge to cover gambling debts. "Mrs. Parker," he said, standing on our porch like he owned the place, "I've received reports of harassment toward HOA officials. Some residents are worried about escalation." That word escalation wasn't a warning. It was a threat. Pay up, or face arrest on whatever trump-tube charges he could invent. Julie didn't blink. She shifted into full prosecutor mode. "Detective, I'm curious what statute gives your department jurisdiction over civil HOA disputes? Under what legal authority are you investigating disagreements between neighbors?" She treated him like a hostile witness, and suddenly, Morrison realized he wasn't facing some ordinary homeowner. He was being cross-examined by someone who knew the law better than he did. But Julie wasn't done. "I'm also curious about your internal affairs case filing number II 202,347, the one involving misuse of department resources for personal gain." I watched the blood drain from Morrison's face. Not pally white as paper. How could a suburban judge's wife possibly know about confidential EA files? Why was she quoting case numbers like she had access to law enforcement servers? Morrison faltered, muttered something, and backed off in confusion. Julie, meanwhile, was already moving forward with her counterattack. She filed formal complaints with the State HOA Oversight Board and the City Ethics Committee, creating official records that forced oversight agencies to open investigations into Kayla's whole operation. Even more important, she began rallying the neighbors. Mrs. Collins, our elderly neighbor, had kept meticulous notes for 2 years. Every fake violation, every inflated fine, every threatening letter. Tom Rodriguez, the board member, had financial records showing embezzlement and unauthorized spending. What had been a community living in fear was now shifting into open resistance. One by one, others stepped forward. A young couple revealed they'd been forced to sell after Kayla fabricated a $40,000 sewage violation. Another family admitted they'd paid thousands under threat of foreclosure. Julie spread the evidence across our dining table like a general planning her campaign. "Blake," she said, her tone all business, This operation has stolen over $400,000 from families. Kayla targets newcomers, minorities, professionals, anyone unfamiliar with the system, people who'll pay instead of fighting. That night, Julie explained why she had been so calm through all of this. I've been working with federal investigators for months. They've been tracking this network. When Kayla targeted us, she handed the FBI everything they needed for a RICO case. It wasn't just Kayla. Morrison, the detective, had been falsifying reports to justify illegal property seizures, covering for contractors, and intimidating victims into silence. Julie had been building a file on him since day one. These weren't squabbles, these were federal felonies carrying decades in prison. Then came the call that shook even Julie. State investigators had traced Morrison's activities further. He wasn't just strong-arming homeowners, he'd been creating false reports to greenlight foreclosures, silencing witnesses, and laundering stolen property into the network. Julie hung up the phone, her usual composure edged with real concern. Blake, this just got much bigger. Morrison isn't just corrupt, he's a central player in a criminal enterprise. He's desperate now, and desperate men are dangerous. That night, I watched her prepare meticulously. Every piece of evidence, every statement from neighbors, every fraudulent document Kayla had shoved in our face as it all went into a case file airtight enough to bury them. Tomorrow everything changes, Julie said, closing her folder with the certainty of a judge delivering a verdict. Kayla's going to overreach one last time. And when she does, Officer Rodriguez will trigger the federal response that takes them all down. But as we were getting ready for bed, her phone rang again. Investigators. Julie listened silently, then turned pale. Blake, she whispered, this goes beyond HOA fraud. Whatever she had just learned was enough to rattle even her, and that meant tomorrow's confrontation wasn't just about shutting down Kayla's scam. It could spiral into something far more dangerous than either of us imagined. The next morning, Morrison was back, but this time, he wasn't alone. He brought a younger officer I didn't recognize and a new, aggressive edge. He didn't look like a man making a polite house call. He looked like someone who'd been told this was his last chance to make a problem disappear. Mrs. Parker, Morrison barked, we've had multiple complaints about harassment and intimidation toward HOA officials. Some residents fear your resistance to community standards could escalate into something more serious. That phrase, something more serious, wasn't a warning. It was the sound of a man backed into a corner, hiding a threat inside police jargon. But here's the thing. My wife had spent her career dealing with mob bosses and white-collar criminals who thought they were untouchable. Compared to them, Morrison was small time. Julie stepped onto the porch with the calm confidence of someone who held all the cards. Julie had been holding her best card all along, and now it was time to play it. Detective Morrison, she said smoothly, I appreciate your concern for community safety. Her tone was calm, deliberate, the one she used when she was about to dismantle someone piece by piece. But tell me, what legal authority allows the sheriff's department to intervene in civil HOA disputes? And more to the point, since when does asking for proper documentation count as harassment? Morrison's young partner started to answer, but Morrison silenced him with a glare sharp enough to cut glass. The rookie shrank back, suddenly fascinated with his notepad, while his superior struggled to wrestle back control of a situation that was slipping fast. Look, Mrs. Parker, Morrison growled, dropping the thin veil of procedure, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your neighbors want peace. Pay the fines, follow the rules, and life goes back to normal. Keep resisting, and things a broken bar get complicated. That's when Julie smiled, and not the polite mask she wore with Kayla, but the lethal smile I'd seen her use on arrogant defendants in federal court. Detective, have you ever heard of U.S. Code, Title 18, Section 1962? She asked, her voice like a knife wrapped in silk. It covers civil rights violations committed under color of law. Specifically, when an officer uses their position to intimidate civilians while protecting a criminal enterprise. Morrison's face drained white, every drop of blood fleeing at once. His rookie partner looked between them, realizing he'd just walked into something far above his pay grade. I stood behind Julie, watching her strip a corrupt cop bare with nothing but knowledge, timing, and authority he couldn't match. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Morrison stammered, already edging toward his patrol car. "This is just a broken bar, a routine welfare check. No issues here." He practically dragged his bewildered partner down our driveway, retreating as fast as he could before Julie threw another dagger of truth his way. As the cruiser disappeared, I finally asked the question that had been gnawing at me. "Julie, a broken bar? How do you know so much about Morrison's file? How do you even have access to internal affairs reports?" She took my hand, led me inside, and closed the door with a finality that told me the next conversation would change everything. "Blake," she began quietly, "I haven't been entirely honest about why I've taken this fight so seriously." My heart thudded. "The FBI has been tracking this network for 8 months. Kayla's whole scheme isn't an isolated scam, it's part of a widespread corruption ring involving city officials, inspectors, and law enforcement across 3 counties. The Bureau needed someone credible, with legal expertise, who could help map the whole structure." I sank into a chair, struggling to process her words. "So when you said you wanted to see how deep the rabbit hole goes, a broken bar, I meant," she confirmed, "that I was already part of the FBI's investigation. Not as an agent, but as a federal judge who happened to move into the right neighborhood at exactly the right time. And when Kayla targeted us, she handed over everything the Bureau needed to build a RICO case." Before I could respond, her phone rang. She answered as Judge Parker, scribbling notes in shorthand as if she were documenting a trial. When she hung up, her eyes glowed with a mix of professional triumph and personal vindication. "The state investigators just confirmed what we suspected," she told me. "Morrison isn't just leaning on homeowners. He's been fabricating reports to justify foreclosures, covering illegal seizures, and intimidating witnesses into silence. He's been providing official cover for the entire operation." That evening, our home turned into a command center. Mrs. Collins arrived with 2 years' worth of notes and letters. Tom Rodriguez brought financial ledgers showing money siphoned to shell companies tied to Kayla. More neighbors contributed stories of families forced out, fines invented, lives disrupted. Julie took charge, arranging evidence across our dining room like a general preparing for war. Timelines, documents, charts of the works. "Here's the reality," she told our little resistance force. "Kayla's operation thrives on intimidation and the assumption no one will fight back. They've never faced organized opposition, airtight documentation, or someone who knows the law well enough to bring them down. Tomorrow, they'll make their fatal mistake." Almost on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Parker needs to understand that some problems require permanent solutions. Pay tomorrow or face consequences." I showed Julie, expecting fear. Instead, she smiled that dangerous smile again. "Perfect. They've just escalated to criminal intimidation using electronic communication. That's a federal felony. They've given us exactly what we need to bring the FBI in full force." Meanwhile, Morrison sat in his car at the end of the street, frantically making a call. I couldn't hear his words, but I could read his body language. "Panic. We've got a problem," he hissed into the phone. "I think she knows about the other thing." The other thing? What could make a dirty cop panic and a federal judge erase messages with trembling hands? We'd get our answer the next morning, when Kayla made the call that would end her empire and trigger a full federal task force response. Friday dawned heavy, like the air before a storm. Julie's phone rang from an unknown number. She gave me a look that said, "This is it," and put it on speaker. Kayla's voice oozed confidence, sharp and venomous. "Mrs. Parker, I trust you've reconsidered your community obligations. This afternoon, I'll be bringing independent verification of your violations, evidence that will settle this matter once and for all." Julie leaned back, coffee mug in hand, amused. "Independent verification? That sounds official. What exactly does that entail?" Kayla delivered her masterstroke. "Officer Rodriguez will conduct a formal compliance assessment. As a neutral party, his findings will prove the need for immediate remediation. I trust you'll be more cooperative with him than you've been with our prior efforts." Julie set her cup down slowly, a glint in her eyes I'd never seen before, real predatory satisfaction mixed with pure anticipation. "Blake," she said, almost vibrating with controlled energy, "Kayla just sealed her fate. She called in a clean cop to witness her biggest power play. What she doesn't realize is she's just handed us the checkmate. This wasn't the thrill of winning some neighborhood argument, it was the sharp, measured satisfaction of a prosecutor watching a defendant confess on live television. Julie knew something Kayla didn't. Officer Rodriguez wasn't just another cop responding to a call. He was about to become the star witness in a federal prosecution that had been quietly building for months. The neighborhood itself had transformed in just a week. What once looked like frightened families peeking out from behind curtains now resembled a coordinated resistance. Mrs. Collins sat firmly on her porch, angled perfectly to observe and record everything. Tom Rodriguez busied himself with washing his car, close enough to catch every word while maintaining the appearance of casual disinterest. 3 more neighbors had found excuses to linger in their yards, forming a silent ring of witnesses. Kayla probably thought they were there to watch her victory over us. In reality, they were gathering evidence for prosecutors who'd been waiting for this moment. Julie had prepared for the day as though she were about to argue the most important case of her career. Files stacked neatly, evidence checked and rechecked, every detail perfected. She'd confirmed with federal agents that surveillance teams were already in position throughout the neighborhood. By the time she sat me down to explain what would unfold, I realized I was witnessing strategy on a level I'd never imagined. When Rodriguez gets here, she explained calmly, Kayla will play her part of presenting fake citations, threatening action, expecting me to fold. What she doesn't know is that she's stepping directly into the net I've been weaving for 2 weeks. This isn't about fines anymore. It's about federal conspiracy charges. Her brilliance was in letting Kayla dig her own grave via collecting every false citation, every intimidation attempt, every misuse of authority until the case was airtight. Not just an HOA dispute anymore, but a federal takedown. By mid-afternoon, the circus began. Kayla arrived first, rolling up in her oversized SUV like she was leading a parade. Morrison trailed behind in his patrol car, looking uneasy. Then came a van filled with her so-called witnesses, people clearly planted to give false statements. But the real scene was set by the neighbors. Mrs. Collins had her notebook and what looked suspiciously like recording gear. Tom Rodriguez positioned himself carefully, close enough to intervene if things went sideways, but covered as just another board member watching. Others had formed a human perimeter of sorts, ensuring no false version of events could stand once this was over. Morrison looked more rattled than ever. His usual intimidation tricks wouldn't land here. Too many eyes, too many cameras. He looked like a man who'd just realized the walls were closing in. Julie, standing at the window, observed like a commander watching the enemy march into her trap. "Blake," she said quietly. This moment was inevitable the second Kayla tried threatening a federal judge. She just hasn't figured it out yet. That was when Officer Rodriguez's patrol car turned down our street. The air shifted instantly from cautious anticipation to electric tension. This was the collision point. Clean law enforcement confronting corruption. Federal power against organized fraud. The justice that families had been waiting years for was finally here. Julie drew in a steadying breath. The kind of breath that carried weeks of preparation and decades of courtroom experience. "It's time," she said simply, straightening her posture like she was about to deliver a verdict. Kayla wasted no time, stepping into the role of prosecutor in her own fantasy courtroom. Clipboard in hand, she strutted across our driveway, flanked by her hand-picked witnesses. Morrison loomed behind her, trying to project authority. It was theater, and she thought Rodriguez would back her up as usual. What none of them realized was that this show was about to become a federal sting operation. Rodriguez walked toward our house, notepad ready, expecting another routine neighborhood quarrel. He had no idea that by setting foot on our driveway, he was about to trigger the largest prosecution the county had seen in decades, all because Kayla had been too arrogant to check who she was targeting. Julie leaned close and whispered with absolute certainty, "Once he sees me, everything changes." I believed her, though I couldn't yet understand the depth of what she meant. The exchange began with Kayla performing her part. "Officer Rodriguez, thank you for responding. Mrs. Parker has been threatening HOA officials and ignoring lawful community standards." She gestured toward our house like it was a crime scene instead of a pristine, multi-million-dollar property. Rodriguez nodded politely, jotting notes. "Routine, civil dispute, nothing unusual. I'll need statements from all parties," he said, glancing toward the house. "Is the homeowner available?" That was Julie's cue. She opened the door and stepped out, looking effortlessly casual, a coffee mug in hand, Saturday morning calm in her posture. Morrison smirked, thinking this would play out like all the others. Rodriguez, pen ready, expected a flustered homeowner desperate to avoid trouble. Instead, recognition dawned, slowly at first, like a half-remembered face from a dream. His pence dulled, his head tilted. Then, suddenly, his eyes widened, and everything clicked. The notepad slipped from his hand, clattering against the pavement. He instinctively removed his hat, as though standing in a courtroom, not a driveway. His mouth opened, shut, then opened again, words failing him. Finally, disbelief broke through his composure. "The broken bar judge? You live here?" The words rang out, clear enough for every Navarra and for Kayla to hear. Shock froze the entire scene. Rodriguez stood there, hat in hand, staring at Julie like she had materialized out of thin air. Kayla's smug expression melted into panic in seconds. "Judge?" she stammered. "What judge? She's just a homeowner." But even as she protested, the truth crushed her. Rodriguez recovered enough to explain, each word hammering a nail into Kayla's fate. "This is Federal District Judge Julie Parker. I've testified in her courtroom many times. She presides over major federal prosecutions." Morrison's face collapsed into sheer panic. He knew exactly what this meant, a caught threatening a federal judge, with cameras rolling and witnesses everywhere. His career, his schemes, his freedom, it was all disintegrating right there on our front lawn. Julie didn't miss a beat. She stepped forward, turning our porch into an impromptu bench. "Officer Rodriguez, this matter requires immediate federal coordination. I have documented evidence of criminal conspiracy, wire fraud, and civil rights violations under color of law." She handed him a folder. 2 weeks of meticulous evidence in her own handwriting. "Detective Morrison has abused his authority to intimidate residents in service of a criminal enterprise. Ms. Sanders has orchestrated a fraudulent scheme that has stolen hundreds of thousands from families across multiple counties." Rodriguez opened the folder, scanning quickly, and I could see the realization forming on his face. This wasn't a neighbor dispute, this was the unraveling of a criminal network. And it was happening right here. Right now. The shift from casual authority to sharp professionalism was immediate. Morrison knew he was holding evidence that tied directly to a federal case. "Your Honor, should I call the FBI field office right now?" he asked. That was the exact moment Kayla's carefully constructed world came crashing down. For 8 years, she'd walked around convinced she was untouchably shielded by corrupt allies and the silence of her community. Now she was face to face with a federal judge who had been quietly building a case against her, supported by weeks of FBI surveillance capturing her every move. "I didn't know," Kayla shrieked, her confidence unraveling into pure panic. "I was just upholding community standards. I didn't realize she was anyone important." Her outburst only made things worse. By confessing she treated people differently based on perceived status, she had essentially admitted to the very civil rights violations federal judges take most seriously. Morrison instinctively moved toward his cruiser, but he didn't get far. Unmarked vehicles opened up around the block, and federal agents poured into the neighborhood. Escape wasn't an option. Agent Miller stepped forward with cuffs in hand, his voice steady and formal. "Miss Sanders, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and civil rights violations." "Detective Morrison, you're facing additional charges for violating civil rights under color of law." Neighbors emerged from behind curtains, finally stepping outside now that Kayla's reign of intimidation was collapsing. Mrs. Collins wept tears of relief. Tom Rodriguez recorded everything for the record, while several victimized families gave sworn statements to federal officers. Julie coordinated the entire operation seamlessly, turning Kayla's arrogance and escalation into ironclad evidence for federal charges that would dismantle the whole criminal ring. As agents led Kayla away in chains, she looked back at our house with a hollow expression, the look of someone who finally realized her life had unraveled because she couldn't be bothered to research her victims before running her scams. Rodriguez pulled me aside. "Blake, your wife just handed us the biggest public corruption case this county has seen in 2 decades, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Her evidence is so thorough, so meticulously documented. It's practically a guaranteed conviction. Watching Morrison in cuffs was the justice I had dreamed of. The man who once tried to use his badge to scare my wife was now headed to prison for abusing that very badge to protect a criminal network. He stared at Julie as though he still couldn't comprehend how an HOA trip had turned into a federal investigation that would end his career and freedom. If you could feel the shift in that moment at the exact point where justice landed on Kayla's victims, then you know how powerful it was. Within minutes, FBI agents transformed our quiet street into a full-scale operation. Unmarked cars appeared from hidden spots, agents in windbreakers emerged from long-held surveillance posts, and the van that had followed Kayla to our home turned out to be full of federal investigators who had been tracking her since the moment her scams escalated into organized crime. Special Agent Miller approached Julie with a rare smile of professional pride. "Judge Parker, incredible work building the foundation for this case. We've got enough documented crimes here to prosecute an entire network." That's when Rodriguez leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Blake, your wife wasn't just collecting evidence on Kayla. She's been piecing together a case that stretches across 3 states. Morrison's panic earlier? It was about more than this neighborhood. They've been faking police reports to justify property seizures, and not just here, but in dozens of communities where corrupt officials covered for them." Kayla's arrest was almost theatrical. Her once smug confidence collapsed instantly. "I was just following HOA procedure," she wailed as agents read her rights. "I didn't know she was anyone important. This is all a mistake." But nobody was buying it. Families she had ruined were stepping forward, bringing years of hidden documentation. The Morgans, forced to sell after bogus violations, brought files they'd saved, praying someone would one day listen. An elderly couple arrived with proof of harassment that had cost them their retirement home. Before the night was over, 12 families had given testimony establishing Kayla's criminal pattern. Julie orchestrated it all with the precision of a federal prosecutor. Piece by piece, she built a RICO case strong enough to dismantle the entire operation. When Agent Miller announced the formal charges of wire fraud, money laundering, civil rights violations, and running a continuing criminal enterprise under RICO statute, it was music to my ears. Morrison's charges stacked even higher, guaranteeing that the man who once waved his badge in my wife's face would be spending the rest of his life behind bars, not hiding behind authority. The community transformation was immediate. Victims began reclaiming their confidence. Mrs. Collins started a neighborhood watch. Rodriguez was elected interim HOA president with a mandate to rebuild from scratch. Families who had considered moving chose to stay, determined to create a truly supportive neighborhood. And through it all, Julie never once abused her authority as a judge. She did it the hard way through relentless research, airtight documentation, and flawless strategy. She showed that justice doesn't come from shortcuts, it comes from preparation, patience, and refusing to be intimidated. That night, she turned to me and said, "Blake, this was never just about us. It was about stopping a criminal machine that's been hurting families for years." The ultimate irony? Kayla's arrogance and laziness destroyed her. By threatening the one person in the county with the expertise and federal connections to end her career, she sealed her own fate. 6 months later, the results spoke for themselves. Kayla pleaded guilty to racketeering and received 18 years in federal prison. Morrison got 12 years for conspiracy and civil rights violations. Their political allies faced their own indictments. Victims received restitution from seized assets. Families regained homes, and our community transformed into a place people were proud to live in. And me, I learned that my wife doesn't just believe in justice, she fights for it, even on her vacation. Watching her dismantle an entire criminal enterprise with nothing but skill and determination was better than any Hollywood thriller. Sometimes the good guys do win, especially when the good guy is a federal judge who refuses to be threatened by small-time crooks with oversized egos. Kayla Sanders picked the wrong house, the wrong family, and the wrong woman. And in doing so, she learned the hard way that federal justice hits harder and lasts longer than any HOA fine.